I used to think my biggest problem was being the disappointing child in a family of overachievers. My brother Caleb is the golden boy, the Ivy League heir to our father's real estate empire. Me, I'm just the girl who spent her trust fund on an art degree and a sense of rebellion. But everything changed because of a $99 Sunday afternoon prank. I just wanted to see the look on Caleb's face when his pureblood ancestry results came back with a surprise. I swapped our DNA samples before mailing them off, imagining a hilarious dinner table reveal. I didn't know I was actually pulling the pin on a grenade that would vaporize my entire life. 3 weeks later, the notification pinged. I opened the portal expecting a joke. Instead, I saw a void. According to the database, Caleb and I share 0% genetic markers. We aren't siblings. We aren't even distant cousins. But the horror didn't stop there. I scrolled down to the parents section, expecting to see Arthur and Alina's profiles. Instead, the screen flashed a bright red "No match found." I sat in my designer bedroom, surrounded by family photos that suddenly felt like crime scene evidence. I'm not just the disappointing daughter, I'm a total stranger. Every birthday, every holiday, every "I love you" from the man downstairs was a lie. As Caleb's laughter echoed up through the floorboards, celebrating another multi-million-dollar deal, I realized the terrifying truth. I'm wearing a dead girl's life. I scrolled to the near matches and found a name: Ivy. She lives in a trailer park 3 towns over and she has my mother's eyes. I have her inheritance and she has my poverty. But as I saw my father watching me through the doorway with a cold, calculated stare, I realized something even worse. This wasn't a hospital mistake. It was a transaction. If you're just joining my descent into madness, here's the recap. A DNA test prank proved I'm not related to my millionaire parents, and my golden boy brother is a total stranger. I'm currently living in a house that feels like a museum of lies, and every time my father, Arthur, looks at me, I wonder if he's mourning his real daughter or just checking his investment. I couldn't sit at that dinner table one more second, pretending to be a Sienna that doesn't exist. I needed the truth, and I knew exactly where Arthur kept his skeletons. The floor-to-ceiling mahogany vault he calls an office. The heavy door creaked as I slipped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't find my birth certificate in the top drawer. Instead, I found a hidden compartment behind a row of leather-bound law books. Inside sat a weathered black folder labeled Nursery Incident 1999. My breath hitched. It wasn't a medical file. It was a non-disclosure agreement signed by the hospital and my father. Tucked inside was a carbon copy of a settlement check for $1.5 million. They didn't just take the wrong baby, they were paid to keep the mistake quiet. But as I flipped to the final page, the betrayal turned into pure ice. It was a handwritten performance review dated from when I was 6 years old. It compared Subject A, me, to Subject B, the biological daughter. Subject A shows higher cognitive potential and aesthetic symmetry, the note read. Procedural swap finalized. Subject B relocated. I wasn't kept because of a tragedy. I was kept because I was the superior product. Suddenly, the shadow of Arthur appeared in the frosted glass of the door. He didn't open it. He just stood there, watching my silhouette, waiting to see if his perfect daughter was about to break the one rule that kept us rich: silence. I left the mansion with the performance review burning a hole in my pocket. I had to see her, the girl Arthur traded away like a defective stock. I found her 3 towns over, a world away from the manicured lawns and gated driveways of my childhood. Ivy wasn't a socialite. She was a ghost in a grease-stained uniform. I sat in my luxury SUV across from a neon-lit diner, watching her through the rain. She had my father's high cheekbones and Alina's delicate hands, but she was carrying a tray of half-eaten burgers with a weariness that looked decades old. I followed her when her shift ended at midnight. She didn't go to a penthouse, she walked to a crumbling trailer park on the edge of the industrial district. Through the thin walls of her home, I heard a coughing fit that sounded like tearing metal. I stepped out into the mud, my designer heels sinking, and knocked. When the door opened, the air left my lungs. Ivy looked at me, really looked at me, and she didn't scream. She didn't even look surprised. She just sighed, her eyes scanning my expensive coat with a chilling recognition. "You're late, Sienna," she whispered, her voice a rough echo of mine. "I figured you'd find the vault eventually. Did Arthur tell you he paid for my mom's heart surgery last month? Or did he forget to mention that my silence has a monthly subscription fee?" I realized then that Ivy wasn't just a victim. She was a prisoner of the same man I called Dad. She was living in the dirt so her mother could breathe, while I lived in the clouds because I was aesthetically symmetrical. But as I looked past her, I saw a familiar black car idling at the end of the dirt road. Arthur wasn't just watching me, he was making sure his two investments never shook hands. The succession gala was meant to be my coronation. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and champagne, all gathered to watch Arthur hand me the keys to the empire. He stood at the podium, beaming with a pride that made my skin crawl. He called me his greatest legacy. But as I stood in the wings, I wasn't thinking about the CEO title or the billion-dollar portfolio. I was thinking about the girl in the trailer park and the performance review that turned us both into products. It was time to show the elite what a real merger looked like. When Arthur beckoned me to the stage, the room went silent. I didn't walk out alone. I reached back and pulled Ivy into the light. She was wearing a dress I'd bought her that morning, the exact same shade of emerald Alina loved. The room gasped as two identical silhouettes stood center stage. Arthur's smile didn't fade, it froze into a porcelain mask. I didn't wait for him to speak. I leaned into the microphone and told the crowd that the perfect heir was a lie, and the real one had just arrived to collect her debt. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush. Arthur didn't panic. He just walked over, his footsteps echoing like a funeral march. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch, and whispered into my ear so the mic wouldn't catch it. "You think this is justice, Sienna? If you say one more word, I'll stop the payments to Ivy's mother tonight. I'll sue them for every cent of the hush money. She'll be in a grave before the sun comes up." He pulled back and smiled for the cameras, waiting to see if I'd trade my biological mother's life for the truth. I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the glitch in Arthur's perfect machine. But after the gala, Caleb found me in the library, his face a ghostly shade of gray. He wasn't the arrogant golden boy anymore, he was a man who had just seen the bottom of the abyss. He didn't come to defend Arthur. He came with his own DNA results and a flash drive he'd stolen from the hospital's digital archives. The rabbit hole didn't just go deep, it opened into a factory. "Sienna, we aren't even from the same hospital," Caleb whispered, his voice trembling. We realized then that Arthur hadn't just settled a nursery mistake. He had systematically handpicked both of us from different cities, using a network of corrupt doctors to build a curated family. We weren't just heirs, we were the result of a 20-year eugenics project. Arthur didn't want children. He wanted a brand, and he had returned the biological versions of us to the scrap heap the moment we were born. The horror intensified when Caleb scrolled to the bottom of the drive. There was a folder labeled contingency plans. Inside were photos of two teenagers, a boy and a girl, already being trained at a private academy in Switzerland. They were our replacements. Arthur had a second set of heirs ready to step in the moment we became defective. As the realization sank in, the lights in the library flickered and died. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, and the voice of Arthur came over the intercom, calm and clinical. "I'm disappointed, Caleb. I expected a higher level of loyalty from the golden child. It seems both of you have exceeded your shelf life. Luckily, the two versions are already at the airport." I spent 24 years believing my value was tied to a name that wasn't mine. But as Arthur's voice echoed through the dark library, I realized that freedom isn't something you're given, it's something you take when you realize you have nothing left to lose. I didn't beg for my life. I didn't argue. I simply looked at Caleb, and for the first time in our lives, we weren't a brand, we were a team. I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit send on a pre-scheduled email to the SEC and the state's largest news syndicate. If Arthur wanted to replace us, he'd have to do it from a prison cell. The light didn't return, but the doors hissed open. Arthur was waiting in the hallway, his face a mask of cold fury as the sirens began to wail in the distance. I didn't stay to watch the handcuffs click. I walked past him, stripped of my emerald dress and my inheritance, and drove straight to that trailer park. I didn't offer Ivy a consulting fee or a seat at a table that was already burning. I handed her the deed to the only property Arthur didn't know I owned, a small farm in my biological mother's name. "The debt is paid, Ivy," I told her. "The machine is broken." I moved into a studio apartment 10 miles away, working a shift at a gallery for minimum wage. Arthur's empire collapsed under the weight of the fraud, and the 2-0 replacements vanished into the shadows of the legal fallout. Caleb moved to the coast, finally living a life that wasn't a performance. But as I sit in the quiet of my new, small life, I look at the one photo I kept from the mansion. It's Eleanor, my mother, holding me as a baby. She's looking at the camera with a look of pure, agonizing grief. Now I have to wonder, did she hate me because I wasn't hers, or did she love me because she knew exactly what Arthur had done to the one she lost? I've finally erased the lie, but as I checked my mail this morning, I found a single DNA kit with no return address. The note inside says, "Arthur wasn't the architect, he was just the first customer. Check Eleanor next." If you want to know whose blood is really running through this family, comment part 2 below.